The tires hum beneath us, steady and low, like a song you can't quite place but somehow don't trust. Arizona stretched out in every direction, endless sagebrush, faded billboards, and the occasional vulture circling wide against the searing sky. I sat in the back of Julia's SUV, knees pressed awkwardly against the back of the passenger seat, pretending to read something on my phone while the conversation up front faded in and out like a weak signal. Julia was laughing. Not the full kind that reached her eyes. This one barely grazed the surface. I learned to tell the difference. Her voice had taken on a thinner, more careful tone these past few months, especially around me. I used to be able to predict her moods like weather, subtle shifts in her shoulders, the way she stirred her coffee. Lately, though, I was losing the forecast. They were talking about a friend from college, someone I never really knew. I heard Sophia say something about lightening the load, and then a stifled laugh that stopped too suddenly. I looked up. Julia caught my eye in the rearview mirror. Just for a second. Then her smile vanished like someone cut the wire. That night, I lay awake in our hotel room while the air conditioner sputtered out bursts of cold that never lasted. Julia was in the shower, and her phone buzzed on the nightstand. I didn't pick it up. I'm not that kind of man, but I glanced at it. A name I didn't recognize. No message preview. Just the three dots of an ongoing conversation. She came out of the bathroom, towel wrapped tight, her eyes flicking to the phone before meeting mine. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "Just can't sleep." She turned away quickly, pretending to fiddle with her makeup bag. The silence between us was heavier than the heat outside. I spent 20 years in a classroom teaching teenagers how the past leaves patterns. Battles aren't won by chance. Revolutions don't erupt overnight. Things build. Tension rises. Weak spots are tested. And when something feels wrong, it usually is. Still, I told myself not to jump to conclusions. People grow. People get tired. I've been buried in work too. Julia had always been surrounded by noise. Clients, plans, group chats with friends who spoke in shorthand and sideways glances. Maybe I was just out of step. But then came the missing bracelet. A simple thing, silver, with a charm shaped like a desert bloom. I gave it to her years ago after one of her biggest event launches. She used to wear it like a badge. That morning, it was sitting in the glove compartment, coiled like a forgotten thought. She told me she'd left it there to keep it safe. But something about the way she said it, too quick, too tidy, clanged against my instincts. I didn't say anything. Just nodded and closed the compartment gently. But inside, something was shifting. Later that day, I called Ben. He and I go way back, fellow teacher, old friend, the kind who never fills silence unless it needs filling. We met at a coffee place off Speedway. The place had that worn-in smell of burnt beans and dusted shelves. We took our usual booth, and I stirred my coffee too long before speaking. "You ever feel like you're missing something right in front of you?" I asked. Ben tilted his head. "You talking about Julia?" I gave a slow nod, watching a couple argue quietly near the window. Their hands moved, but their faces stayed still. "She's different lately. Quiet, distant. I can't tell if I'm imagining it or if something's shifting under me." Ben leaned back, scratched his jaw. "Could be nothing. Could be you're picking up on something real. You've got that radar, man. Always have." "Yeah, well," I said, pushing the cup away. "I used to think that radar helped me spot the good stuff. Lately, it's just making me nervous." "You want my opinion?" Ben asked, voice low. "Stay alert. Don't go accusing her of anything, but don't ignore what you see." The clink of my spoon against the mug felt louder than it should have. That night, after we returned from dinner with her friends, I watched Julia from the balcony of our hotel room. She was inside, brushing her hair, the light catching the gold in her strands. I remembered the early days, us in a cramped apartment, eating cereal for dinner, laughing until we cried. She used to reach for my hand in quiet moments, like it was her way of saying, "We're in this together." Now her hands moved differently, precise, cautious, like she was performing a version of herself I no longer recognized. I stepped back inside. She turned. "Coming to bed?" "In a minute," I said. I walked to the small desk, opened my notebook, the one I used for lecture notes and ideas, and wrote a single line across the top of a fresh page. History doesn't lie. People do. The next morning, we stopped at a gas station off Highway 93, a forgotten place with cracked pavement and a vending machine humming like it had secrets. Julia went inside with Sophia. I stayed back to fill the tank, the desert wind brushing against my neck. I heard them before I saw them, just inside the store. Their voices low, but not low enough. "He's not picking up on anything," Sophia said. Julia sighed. "I know. But he's starting to look." They both laughed, short, nervous. Then the chime of the door as they saw me heading in. "Everything good?" I asked. "Yeah," Julia said too quickly. "Just grabbing snacks." I nodded, but something in my gut hardened. Back outside, I went to grab a bottle of water from the cooler at the edge of the lot. The sun was starting to sink, casting long shadows across the pavement. When I turned back toward the SUV, it wasn't there. Just the faint imprint of tires in the dirt and the shimmering taillights already disappearing down the road. I stood in the gravel lot of that gas station, sweat soaking through the back of my shirt, the desert heat pressing on my chest like a judgment. The SUV was gone. No message. No explanation. Just the faint outline of tire tracks snaking toward the highway, and the last red flicker of tail lights swallowed by dust. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Maybe they looped around. Maybe they were playing one of those careless pranks Julia's friends liked, harmless to them, less so to the person left behind. I reached for my phone to call her. Did. Of course. I checked my pockets. No wallet. It was in the SUV, where I'd left it, tucked in the center console beside the receipts from breakfast and a half-empty bottle of water. I walked slowly back inside the gas station, the glass door rattling shut behind me. The clerk barely looked up, a teenager with earbuds in, tapping at a phone behind the counter. The air conditioning hummed weakly, pushing out more sound than cold. "You see that SUV take off?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He shrugged. "Couple women." "Yeah." "They stopped just down the road for a minute. Then peeled off." "Stopped? Did someone get out?" I asked. "Nah," he said. "Just sat there. Then took off. Fast." I stepped back out into the sun, blinking against the glare. My thoughts moved like syrup, slow, sticky, refusing to line up. That single word kept echoing, stopped. Not rushed, not panicked. Stopped up, like a decision had been made. Across the road was a narrow patch of shade thrown by a rusted signpost. I sat there, dust clinging to my slacks, and opened my email from the old backup phone I carried in my bag, an outdated thing used mostly to store lecture slides and old photos. No signal. But the station offered a shaky Wi-Fi connection. I logged in. One new message, forwarded from an address I didn't recognize. Subject, "Thought you should see this." I hesitated before opening it. Some part of me didn't want to know. Not yet. But the moment had come. The kind of moment I taught my students about. When everything changes, history pivots on the smallest turn of a key. The email was a screenshot of a message thread between Sophia and Julia. My eyes scanned the lines, stomach tightening with every word. Sophia, still on for tomorrow? Time to ditch the extra baggage. Julia, it's for the best. He doesn't belong in this part of my life. I read it twice, then again. Extra baggage. That was me. The heat felt colder somehow. My breath didn't come as easily. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, the dust between my fingers grounding me. 12 years together. The road trips, the shared dinners, the little routines, Wednesday pasta, Sunday hikes. All of it dismissed in a line of text. I closed my eyes and saw her the night before our wedding, standing barefoot in her mother's kitchen, laughing as she practiced her vows on a napkin. "You've always made me feel safe," she'd said. "Like I can breathe deeper when you're near." Now, I was suffocating. I don't know how long I sat there. Long enough for the sun to shift. A passing truck rattled the ground, and I blinked back into myself. I had to know who. I tapped around the forwarded email, found the name of the sender. It wasn't anonymous. It was Ben. At first, I didn't understand. The timing didn't make sense. Then I remembered he once told me Julia had added him on social media years ago for event invites. Maybe he'd seen something. Maybe this was his quiet way of warning me. The pieces slid into place, slow, sharp, each one carving its own wound. This wasn't just Julia and Sophia. There was someone else. A third voice I hadn't heard, but now couldn't stop imagining. I went back inside the store, asked the clerk where the nearest bus stop was. "Next town over," he said, chewing gum. "But there's a mechanic up the road. Real guy's guy. Might give you a lift if you ask nice." I thanked him and walked the stretch of cracked shoulder road, the sun dipping behind the low ridge to the west, throwing everything into bronze and shadow. A few mesquite trees twisted along the roadside like gnarled hands reaching for something long lost. The mechanic gave me a lift without questions. That kind of kindness has a way of breaking you open more than cruelty does. Back at the hotel where we'd stayed, I sweet-talked the desk clerk into letting me into the room Julia and I had shared. She hadn't checked out. Her suitcase was gone. Only her dress from the night before remained, carelessly draped over the chair, still holding the scent of her perfume and desert wind. On the nightstand was her planner. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. There, scrawled in her familiar script, were meeting notes and venue dates. And wedged between two appointments was a name, repeated twice, underlined, Evan. The name hit like a cold slap. Evan was our old neighbor, a graphic designer, divorced. He'd helped us repaint the living room once, and I'd grilled burgers on his porch. He and Julia always got along, but I never gave it much thought. Until now. I closed the planner slowly. My fingers trembled, not from rage, but from the finality of it all. Like a door closing behind me, I didn't realize I'd walked through. I sat on the edge of the bed and let the silence settle. There was no more wondering. No more maybes. Only truth. And with truth comes a choice. I stood, washed my face in the bathroom sink, and looked at myself in the mirror. I looked older than I remembered. Not broken, just weathered. Like a man who'd walked too far under a heavy sky and finally stopped pretending the clouds would clear on their own. Justice doesn't come to those who wait. It comes to those who see. And I had seen. The campfire flickered in the distance as I stepped from the brush. Laughter floated through the dusk. I saw her silhouette first, then the others. I wasn't supposed to be there. But I was. And I was done being the one left in the dark. The road to their campsite curved between the dark silhouettes of cottonwoods and the whisper of wind in dry grass. I walked the last half mile in near silence, my boots crunching softly against loose gravel. The night had settled over the desert like a breath held too long, cool now, but close. Up ahead, the glow of a campfire flickered between parked cars. Shadows moved behind it, figures leaning in, laughing low. I saw her before she saw me. Julia sat slightly apart from the others, her posture loose but distracted. She was nursing a glass of wine, her gaze fixed on the flames. I stepped into the firelight. At first, no one spoke. Sophia stiffened. Someone muttered a curse under their breath. The hum of conversation withered like a radio losing signal. Julia turned slowly. Her eyes widened, not with surprise, but with recognition. Like she'd always known this moment would come. "Can we talk?" I said. My voice was steady, but I felt it shaking somewhere in my ribs. A beat passed. Then she nodded and stood, brushing non-existent dust from her jeans. We walked toward the edge of the trees, far enough from the fire that its warmth no longer touched us. "I know about Evan," I said quietly, "and about Sophia's plan. I read the messages." She froze, her arms wrapped around herself, like the cold had just caught up. "How could you break us like that?" I asked. "After everything we'd built?" She didn't look at me. Not yet. Her eyes traced the horizon, barely visible through the dark, where stars began to scatter. "It wasn't about him," she said at last, voice tight. "It wasn't some grand affair. It was just something I needed. Something you needed." The words lodged in my throat. "You could have talked to me. You could have said something before deciding I was dead weight." Julia turned then, her face pale in the moonlight. "I tried Nathan. 4 months. You were buried in lectures and paper drafts, lost in lesson plans and Civil War documentaries. I felt invisible. I was working for us, for our future. I thought we were still in this together." She shook her head, blinking back something that never fell. "We stopped being together a long time ago. You just didn't want to see it." Silence opened between us, heavy and wide. I stepped closer. "You didn't just give up on me. You lied. You planned with your friends to leave me stranded in the middle of nowhere. That wasn't neglect, that was cruelty. I didn't plan it," she snapped, then lowered her voice. "Sophia pushed it. Said you wouldn't even notice. I went along with it because I was tired of pretending." I let that sit. The fire cracked in the distance. Somewhere behind us, a coyote howled, distant, lonely. A part of me wanted to yell, to demand answers, to break something just to hear it shatter. But instead, I breathed in the cold night air and said, "You broke our trust, Julia, but not my worth." She winced like I'd slapped her. "That's not fair." "No," I said, "but it's true. And maybe truth is the only fair thing left between us." Then her phone buzzed. A small vibration. She glanced down. "Evan." I saw the name flash on the screen before she silenced it. "Is that where you're going after this?" I asked. "Back to him." She didn't answer. I looked down at the dust on my boots, remembered when she bought them for me, Father's Day 5 years ago. We'd laughed over beers that night, danced barefoot in the kitchen. I told her I'd never take them off. Now they stood between us like a worn-out promise. "What are you going to do, Nathan?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Tell everyone. Humiliate me. Make me the villain in your version of things." I stared at her a long moment. Then I said, "You don't need my help with that." She flinched. I almost apologized, but stopped myself. The truth is, I didn't know what I was going to do. Not yet. Expose her? Keep quiet? Protect what little dignity we had left, or let the truth fall where it may? I haven't decided, I admit it. But I do know this. I won't be erased quietly. I have a right to my story, too. Behind us, the fire popped. Laughter returned, forced and distant. Life was already moving on without us. Julia stepped back. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "Funny," I said. "Neither did I." For a moment, we stood in the silence. No more lies, no more pretending. Just two people standing on opposite sides of something broken. I turned and started walking back through the trees. Behind me, I didn't hear her follow. The next morning, I sat alone at a roadside diner, steam rising from my coffee. The waitress set down a check and gave a kind smile I hadn't earned. I stared at the tiny note Julia had left in my bag. 5 words, scrawled in her familiar hand. "Please don't hate me forever." And I couldn't help but wonder, was she asking for forgiveness or permission to forget? Ben let me crash on his couch when I got back to Tucson. He didn't ask for details right away, just handed me a blanket, pointed to the guest bathroom, and said, "Coffee's at 6. That was his way of giving me space without leaving me alone. His place was small but orderly, like a man who knew the value of clean lines and clear boundaries. I admired that about Ben. He didn't waste energy on messes he couldn't fix. I laid there that night, staring at the ceiling fan spinning slow above me, listening to the quiet tick of a wall clock. Each second was a pinprick in the dark. I replayed our confrontation beneath the trees, her voice, the look in her eyes when I said, "You broke our trust, but not my worth." At the time, I meant it. But now, I felt gutted. A memory came back to me, her hand tracing mine across the blueprint of our first home. "Right here," she said, pointing to the corner of the garage. "You should build your workshop there. You'll make it yours." That little room became my sanctuary. Dust, sawdust, and the scent of pine. It was where I made things last. Tables, chairs, crib. Things meant to outlive where. But some things don't hold. 3 days after the confrontation, Julia called. I didn't pick up, but her voicemail was waiting. "I know you're angry. I don't blame you. But please don't make any decisions yet. We can fix this. We can find our way back." She didn't mention Evan, or the gas station, or Sophia. Just us, as if the fracture could be ignored if we said the right words. The next day, I drove past our house. Our house. It still felt wrong saying hers. The lawn had grown in patches, a curling flyer tucked into the storm door. The place looked hollow, like a memory trying too hard to stay upright. Ben and I sat out back later that evening. 2 beers between us, the desert sky going pink at the edges. "What's stopping you?" he asked. I shrugged. "It's not just about leaving. It's about what I'm walking away from. History, yeah. The good parts. The plans. The way we used to be." Ben took a sip, leaned back. "You can honor your past without living in it." I turned that over. Then he added, "The question isn't what you'll lose. It's what you can live with." That stuck. What can I live with? Could I live with pretending this didn't happen? With rebuilding on fractured trust? Or with starting over, carrying the ache, but owning the road ahead? I thought about my workshop. It was still mine, at least legally. But Julia wanted the house. Her lawyer sent over a message the following day, casual in tone, but firm. She hoped to keep the house for stability, but offered to buy out the workshop space. As if a man's retreat, his labor, could be itemized and boxed up. I spent that evening in my classroom. The school was empty. The echo of footsteps down long corridors always made me feel grounded. I opened a drawer and pulled out a folder I'd used to track a new curriculum idea, a series on historical turning points, how individual decisions had reshaped entire civilizations. Funny how personal that felt now. I picked up the pen and began signing the papers my lawyer had drawn up. Divorce. Clean. Respectful. No spite. No spectacle. Just done. The pen moved slowly, deliberately, each stroke its own reckoning. I kept thinking, this is what it looks like to protect your dignity. Quiet. Firm. Final. The next day, I asked Julia to meet me at a park near the foothills. Somewhere neutral. She showed up late, wearing the same perfume she used to wear when we'd go dancing. I wondered if that was intentional. "I got the papers," she said, eyes guarded. "I figured you would," I replied. She studied me like she was trying to find the version of me she used to know. But I wasn't there anymore. Not really. I thought maybe she started, then stopped. "Doesn't any part of you want to try?" I met her gaze. The part that did left with a trust. She looked down at her hands. "I never stopped loving you." I nodded. "But you stopped choosing me. That matters more." We didn't say goodbye. There wasn't a word that fit. She walked back to her car, and I stayed where I was, the breeze tugging at the edge of my jacket, a few birds cutting through the sky above. That night, I returned to Ben's and slept without dreaming. For the first time in weeks, my jaw wasn't clenched. I wasn't whole yet, but I wasn't lost either. The next morning, a colleague passed me in the hallway at school and said casually, "Heard Julia's been saying you've been unstable, that you just snapped." I didn't respond. Not right away. But as I walked back into my classroom, dust motes dancing in a morning light, one question rose quietly in my mind. How do you rebuild when someone's rewriting your story in real time? The apartment was smaller than our house. 2 rooms, narrow kitchen, a balcony that overlooked a parking lot and the edge of the desert beyond. But it was mine. There were no lingering perfumes in the closet, no echoes of arguments in the hall. Just the quiet creak of floorboards and the hum of an old refrigerator. Constant, simple sounds. After everything, silence wasn't emptiness anymore. It was a kind of peace. The divorce had finalized 2 weeks ago. The papers arrived in a nondescript envelope, like it was any other business transaction. I ran my fingers along the sealed edge before opening it, breathing in, steadying myself. No drama. No fireworks. Just ink and finality. That night, I made dinner alone, grilled chicken, a cold beer, and a cracked radio playing blues at a volume low enough to think. Afterward, I stood on the balcony, Tucson lights flickering beneath a sky still holding the last pink hues of day, and I felt something surprising. Relief. It didn't mean I wasn't hurting. There were still nights I'd reach for a shape in the dark that wasn't there. Still moments where I'd catch myself wanting to share a story or a joke, only to remember there was no one on the other end anymore. But I didn't feel broken. I felt in progress. I started jogging again. Just short loops around a neighborhood at first, sunrise jogs where the air was crisp and the city hadn't fully stirred. I ran past kids waiting for buses, sleepy baristas unlocking cafe doors. Each morning, the miles came easier, and the weight in my chest loosened, breath by breath. Back at school, I threw myself into the history fair I'd always wanted to lead. I worked with a group of seniors on a project about turning points, how quiet choices often reshape entire lives. The irony wasn't lost on me. Ben still checked in, showing up with burritos and unsolicited advice. "Pace yourself," he said one night over dinner. "Healing's not a finish line. It's a rhythm." He was right. Some nights I still felt the ache. But others, like when a student stayed late to talk about college or when I made it through a week without remembering the sound of her laugh, I realized the rhythm was changing. The challenge came sooner than I expected. I ran into Evan at the hardware store. I was picking up sandpaper and stain for a bookshelf I'd started building. Oak, smooth grain, 3 tiers. I caught him in the aisle, trying to decide between 2 types of drill bits. He saw me and froze. No smug grin. No nod. Just a flinch. For a second, I considered walking away. But I didn't. I stepped forward. He looked like he'd swallowed glass. "You got a minute?" I asked, voice even. He nodded. "Look, Nathan." I raised a hand, not to silence him, but to stop whatever scripted apology was coming. "You took my trust," I said, "but not my future. So whatever you think you've won, just know this isn't a victory. Not for you. Not for her." He looked down. "I didn't mean." "You did," I said. "You both did. Just own it." I let the silence settle between us. Let it say the rest. Then I walked past him, sandpaper in hand, didn't look back. I finished the bookshelf that weekend. The wood was stubborn in places, but I liked the resistance. It reminded me that good things require effort. I placed it beneath the window in my living room. The morning light hit the top shelf just right, warm, steady, honest. I started hiking again, too. Joined a local group that met on Sundays, all ages and walks of life. Out there in the open desert, surrounded by sun-bleached rocks and dry wind, something in me began to reset. One morning, as we reached the top of Tumamoc Hill, one of the older hikers, a retired nurse named Carla, turned to me and said, "You're looking lighter these days. You must have dropped something heavy." I smiled. "Yeah," I said. I did. It wasn't bitterness. It wasn't even pride. Just the quiet satisfaction of having made it through something without losing myself along the way. That same week, the school history fair came and went. My students presented projects that were thoughtful, messy, brilliant, just like life. As I helped one of them set up their board, she asked, "Mr. Klein, what made you want to do this fair?" I paused, then said, "Sometimes it's the stories we don't tell that need a voice the most." She nodded, not fully understanding, but maybe one day she would. Later that night, I returned home to find an envelope tucked beneath my door. No return address, just my name and Julia's handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "I heard about the fair. I'm glad you're doing well. I never stopped believing you'd land on your feet. P.S. If you ever want to talk, just talk. You know where to find me." I read it twice. Then I folded it once and slid it into the back of a drawer, not to hide it, but to let it rest. The next morning, I sat by the bookshelf, coffee in hand, watching the sun creep across the floorboards. My phone buzzed. A message from a colleague. "You hear about Julia's business? Things are unraveling." I didn't open it right away. Just stared at the light pooling on the wood grain and wondered, not with anger, but curiosity, what justice looks like when it finally arrives. A year can feel like a lifetime, or just long enough to become someone you almost recognize again. It was a spring afternoon, the kind Tucson does best. Clear sky, air warm but not heavy, the desert just beginning to bloom with those stubborn little bursts of color that show up when you least expect them. I just finished helping my students wrap up a new exhibit in the school library, this time on unsung historical figures, and was gathering my things when Ben stopped by. He leaned against the doorway, arms folded, that usual unreadable smirk on his face. "You hear about Julia?" he asked, voice low. I looked up from my desk, slow to answer. "No." He came in and sat down across from me. "Her event planning firm went under. Sophia took some big risks with investor money. Bad timing, worse judgment. It all fell apart. I didn't say anything at first. Not because I was surprised, but because I wasn't. She's working at the community center now," Ben added. "Doing logistics for charity events. Real low-key." I nodded slowly. "That sounds different. Word is, she's not the same. Keeps to herself. Doesn't really talk about what happened." There was no glee in Ben's voice, just observation. The kind I was used to making myself, quiet, factual, like a historian noting a chapter's end. That night, I stopped by a local bookshop where one of my students had a poetry reading. It was small, just a dozen folding chairs and a mic on a stand, but the energy in the room was alive. I sat near the back, applauding with everyone else, letting their voices fill the space between my ribs. Afterward, as I stepped outside into the cool dusk, I saw her. Julia. She was across the street, standing beside a food truck, waiting for her order. She wore a navy jacket I recognized from years ago, her hair pulled back, face thinner than I remembered. She saw me too. We didn't wave, just a moment of stillness between us. Then, after a pause, she walked over. "Hey, Nathan," she said, her voice quiet. "Hey." She looked down, then back up. "I heard about the history fair this year. They said it was one of the best yet. Kids did most of the work," I said with a half smile. "I just helped them believe they could." She nodded, and for a beat, we stood in the hum of passing cars and soft conversation from the truck line. "I wanted to say I'm sorry," she said, "for everything. Not just what I did, but for not seeing you. Not seeing what we had." Her voice trembled a little on that last word. "I used to think ambition meant always reaching for more," she added. "But sometimes it just means not breaking what's already whole." I let her words hang there. I didn't need to answer them. She wasn't asking for anything. "I'm glad you're doing well," she said, and this time I believed her. "I am," I said simply. She nodded once, stepped back, and returned to the food truck without looking back. And I stood there for a while, watching a little girl chase her father across the plaza, the sound of her laughter skipping through the air like stones across water. There was no bitterness, no what if, just the quiet knowing that her story would go on, and so would mine, but on separate pages now. Back home that night, I sat in the glow of the bookshelf I'd built, the one that had become something of a journal in wooden grain. Every groove told a part of the journey, pain sanded down, resilience sealed in. There were framed photos now. Hiking trips with new friends, a class project I was proud of, a shot of me with a colleague I'd grown close to. Maybe something more would come of that. Maybe not. For now, it was enough to feel connection again. I opened the window. The desert air rolled in dry, rich with creosote and possibility. I picked up a pen and scribbled a line I hadn't quite been able to put into words until now. The past broke me, but I rebuilt stronger, and I meant it. The next morning, I packed a thermos of coffee, tossed a flannel into the truck, and hit the road. No destination in mind, just movement. As I drove, the sun rose slow over the hills, casting gold over the open plain. The road stretched wide in both directions, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running from something. I was driving toward something new. The horizon waited, quiet, steady, free, and I was ready to meet it.